believe in, humility to accept the combined decisions of others, patience, good humour at all times, tolerance and courtesy while working in the best interests of our community. If I can welcome governing body members and members of the public and council officers. First of all, we come to apologies. I have apologies from Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore on council business and from Councillor Kathy Casey, who's absent at a funeral this morning. Are there any other apologies? Sorry, Councillor Watson for lateness? Right. So I'll move that we accept those apologies. I have a seconder from Councillor Collins. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. 3, declaration of interest. Are there any members of the governing body that have any interest that they need to declare that will be affected by today's proceedings? If not, we come to confirmation of minutes. We have one set of minutes to confirm, the minutes of the 28th of February 2019. I'll move that they be confirmed. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Petitions, there are no petitions. Public input, there have been no requests for public input. Just before I come to local board input, can I foreshadow, given that this is the first meeting of the governing body since the tragic events caused by the terrorist attack in Christchurch, that I will be moving under extraordinary business to accept an item to discuss Christchurch and to move certain resolutions arising out of that. And with, I think, the concurrence of everybody, that should be earlier on our agenda rather than later on the agenda. It should not be left to item 16. So I'm suggesting that we discuss that and councillors will have the opportunity to have their say on that immediately after the local board input. I don't think it needs requiring, but thank you for your support, councillor, on that. So we come to local board input, and I'd like to invite local board members Troy Churton and David Wong to the table to talk about pre-application documentation being available to local board members. Troy and David, welcome. I think you're both aware of how we do this, so if you can give us an outline of the concerns that you wish to raise in about 5 minutes, and then there'll be opportunities for governing body members to raise questions. Yeah. I may, at the end of your exposition, just ask our council officers to bring a commentary in, because it's a reasonably technical matter, and I think that might be helpful both to you and to us. Troy and Tony, welcome. Troy, you're leading.
Thanks, Mayor Goff and fellow elected reps. Just to clarify, what we're doing here today is seeking your endorsement for elected representatives to be able to request and receive, as of right, access to pre-lodgement information, minutes, etc., made by council members of staff. So David's going to take you through the first part of the memo, and I'll take you through the second part. It should take no more than 5 minutes at the top.
Thank you to the governing body for the opportunity to present our case. The Auckland region, and also notably the Ōrākei ward, has been undergoing significant development and infrastructure changes. These changes impact our macroeconomic framework and suburban infrastructure and landscape. From a governance and oversight perspective, it is important that any elected representative, local board or governing body, can perform their duties and effectively and efficiently assess all information on developments proposed by applicants. This includes, when entering the consent phase, the board is abreast of key information to support its view in a balanced and transparent manner. The request for pre-application minutes and documentation is not extraordinary. The information may or may not be confidential, but if council planners have had these preliminary discussions with the applicant, then the local board should not be removed from access to minutes from this exchange. The principal request for information originated in July 2018, nearly 9 months ago. we have pivoted from one council planning contact to the next to achieve an outcome. This is not the first request for such information. Many ratepayers, resident and business associations, and other interested parties raise the awareness of developments as they become more familiar with the unitary plan and seek answers to impacts on their neighbourhoods even before formal applications are filed, and of course once they are filed. Many developers also hold pre-lodgement engagement meetings with some of these residents and groups. As elected members, we are representatives of these stakeholders. Having access to pre-lodgement exchanges keeps us abreast of potential development and abreast of how council may interpret the unitary plan.
So just, David and I are referring to a memo which hopefully has been circulated around. We're up to number 8 of that memo, which talks about how we're seeking consistency and transparency with access to pre-lodgement application material. And in point 9, thanking the Acting Director of Regulatory Services for a response, which is the very, very last attachment on your hard copy bundle in your agenda, the copy of that letter which was sent to us back in December or January. And in that letter, the Director states, quoted, "Under the need-to-know principle, elected members should have access to information held by council where it's reasonably necessary to enable that member to properly perform their particular statutory duties." The Director also in that letter, under the heading Ōrākei Local Board Access to Pre-Application Material, says that pre-lodgement exchanges are not part of the formal regulatory decision-making function for council's delegated planners under the RMA process. And that's quite important in relation to what we're saying, because taking that position, recognising that pre-lodgement is not actually part of the regulatory decision-making phase, puts a unique slant on our access to pre-lodgement application information. It's inappropriate, in our view, that any elected representative, you guys or us as local board members, when we are asking to see pre-lodgement application material that the council itself may have generated, such as a minute or something of that nature, has that request for information determined on a need-to-know basis by some planner manager with delegated authority for decision-making under a regulatory process which actually hasn't yet started. It's an incorrect legal position that's been taken here. The correct pathway, and this is very strongly submitted by us, is that if you or us requested pre-lodgement information material, then our inherent duty of care and our code of conduct requirement to understand what information is confidential or not, what information is sensitive or not, what information is council internal or not, kicks in. And that is the appropriate way to determine access to information, not by way of a gatekeeping needs to know basis administered by a planning manager. Our statutory duties, point 13, cover compliance and alignment to obligations, and in one of the executive's letter, paragraph of his letter, he says that an applicant may have an expectation that information would not be public, and that's fair enough, some of them do. Some developers get quite sensitive about their pre-lodgement meetings and that sort of thing. The elected representative's duty of care and code of conduct requirements are such that a competent elected representative must know that and must only expect to have access to information with that in mind. Let's not presume the lowest common denominator in terms of the ability of elected reps to understand that getting free, unfettered access to pre-lodgement application comes with overriding duties of care and confidence to council, because we are part of council, lest we forget. The local board members are not the public. the local board members are elected members of Auckland Council. So over the page in 15, just to wrap up, like I started, what we are asking this governing body to do is to formally recognise that you as governing body members and ourselves as local board members may, on request, and that's important too, we're certainly not saying that every elected rep must now, as an extra administrative layer, always have access to every pre-lodgement minute or meeting or note or whatever. It's on an on-request basis. But the request should not be denied by a needs-to-know approach. And that we will receive that pre-lodgement information regardless of whether an applicant has sought confidentiality or not, because the confidentiality, if they've sought it, would be between council and the applicant, and the elected rep would be expected in getting access to that info to uphold that confidentiality, unless there were very good reasons not to, and that would surely be discussed by an elected rep with the appropriate planning manager. But I can't think of a case where an elected rep would want to breach that, given the code that we all adhere to. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Troy and David. Look, I absolutely respect the way in which you've made this submission and the genuineness of your concern. It is a matter that I had to seek advice on because I wasn't aware of the background and the technicalities around it. So with your indulgence, I'd like to ask James Hessel and Ian Smallburn just to come share the table with you at the front, just so that you can hear a direct response from them as well as the formal response you've had, and then we'll go to questions from councillors. So once again, James and Ian, if I can ask you to keep your comments succinct, and then we'll come to questions.
Thank you, Mayor Phil. I think it's important to remember what we're talking about here. Pre-application meetings and the minutes and material that go with them are a mechanism that we use in the Resource Consents Department to encourage applicants to come in prior to lodging their applications so that they can have a free and frank discussion about what they're intending to do. It is only their intentions at this point in time. They speak with our staff, they might speak with some of the experts that we have in the department as well to bounce ideas around and to work out whether or not what they're proposing is going to fly in a consenting process. Their intentions often change as a result of that, or the shape of whatever it is that they're proposing changes after our discussion. Sometimes, of course, we have to say, well, actually, what you're proposing isn't even going to fly, so that they don't even proceed with that. They come to us with that expectation that they can talk in a free and frank manner, that there will be some confidentiality. That's not to say that there's always that level of confidentiality. In one particular instance related to the Ōrākei local board, we asked the applicants whether they're happy to have the information disclosed to the local board, and they were fine with that. In another case, that they weren't for reasonable commercial sensitivity reasons. We're also in a challenging position in that we're trying to push through as many consents as possible, as quickly as possible. The pre-application meeting process enables a lot of issues to be sorted out prior to us entering into the statutory timeframes that we need to meet. So it's a win-win for council and the applicant if we can get this done as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Thank you very much. Let's go to questions from members of the governing body. Councillor Wayne Walker first, and then Councillor Simpson.
Just in terms of the procedure here, given that we've had somebody as an officer speaking and Troy, is it appropriate for me to ask questions of both, or should I confine myself to the local board? Yeah,
I'm reasonably relaxed. I think we should focus on the local board members because we'll have further access to our officials. But if there's something important you want to ask the officials, I'm happy to go along with that, Councillor.
Okay. So just in terms of context, I just wonder if you're familiar, for example, with the protocols we've got that we're developing with CCOs that go to the exchange of information with local boards.
Troy, could I get you just to put the mic on, please?
Not intimately familiar.
Okay, and the other question I've got, have you sought any advice from the Ombudsman or the like around this issue?
We're hoping not to have to go that far.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay, that's right. Thank you.
Perhaps I can just help a little with that latter question. I understand that there is an old Lagoima case before the Ombudsman at the moment that relates to this, and if the Ombudsman makes a ruling, then clearly we would need to ensure our practices and our processes are aligned with that. I'm not quite sure when we might expect that ruling from the Ombudsman. I don't know whether our local board members are familiar with that. It's a case involving, I think, the North Shore from some years back. Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to the local board for bringing this to the governing body's attention. It's a really quite tricky one because this is we can't make any decisions here. This is just about questions and listening to the local board. So to that end, I'll couch my question very carefully, maybe to Ian Smallburn, if I may, and to the local board, the same question. And that is, I have had a follow-up meeting on behalf of the local board with Ian Smallburn as a request from the local board through me about this issue. And my question to Ian and to the local board, are you happy for those meetings to continue? Because what I believe that staff are trying to do is traverse both the legal and the need of the local board, traverse that very delicate pathway between the two. And I just think it needs a bit of further discussion. We can't resolve right now because it's public forum, but I think what potentially we need to do is have further discussion with the local board and with Ian and try and come up with a solution and then maybe present it back. Is that acceptable to you, Mr. Smallburn?
Yeah.
And local board, is that acceptable to you?
I'd be more than happy to continue those conversations. I recognise that there are pros and cons and possibly some form of middle ground could be formed regarding information, but at the same time not creating inefficiencies and not losing confidence in the pre-application process. So I'm more than happy to continue those conversations, yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Troy, were you wanting to comment on that? Or?
Yeah, look, we are more than happy with Desley continuing on with Ian, that's for sure. And yeah, no.
Okay, that's good. Councillor Cooper.
Can we turn some of these off? Because it's thank you.
Sorry, if the public's not using their mic, can turn them off.
Churton, I'm just trying to understand, given that neither the local boards or the councillors get to make decisions on resource consents, I'm just wondering what the need for that early information is, given that, as Mr. Hassel said, often doesn't even happen. I just want to understand why, given that you, at the time of the application being made public, and even before that, you'll often get a notification decision you need to input into, that sort of stuff. I want to understand what is the need for that information, because you do get all the information and then you do have the opportunity to submit. That's the choice. You can, the work that we've done in a formal working party around this, and you have all the information. So to express the views of the public, okay? So that's your role. What is the purpose of you wanting all of that sort of early information that may not have been developed yet? I'm just trying to understand it.
So, thanks. It's a really good question, Councillor. And the reality is that only a very few number of applications come to local boards for comment. There are certain triggers, and the list of triggers that require planners to send files to us for comment are refined. and the percentage of those applications that we get, which we comment on, in which our comments make any form of difference as to notification, is also slimmer because of changes to the RMA, which have taken away a lot of notification rights for the community. So one of the key purposes of having access to information, both pre-decision-making process, which is the pre-lodgement stage, and the opportunity, once the decision-making process is formally in place, is enabling an elected rep to keep a monitoring eye that both the processes of the RMA and the development of what's happening under the unitary plan is happening according to the policies of the unitary plan. And retaining an elected rep's right to have access to information fulfills that. It's a really important distinction to make, Linda, Councillor Linda, the time the file becomes public is when it's actually lodged formally, right? And even then, the ability of the community to have input on that is incredibly slender. The only opportunities for anybody with any interest really is down to the elected reps. And it was interesting that my friend Mr. Hassell's comments were indicative of the key things that elected reps like us at this table need to make sure we retain access to info on. Mr. Hassell said, pre-lodgement applications are about encouraging free discussions between applicants and developers and so forth in council. Agreed. No doubt about that whatsoever. He also said, pre-lodgement applications enable a lot of issues to be sorted out prior to the decision process. And that's where it becomes a little bit contentious, folks, because council's legal advice seems to be that the pre-lodgement process is actually a way of facilitating a fast tracking of the decision-making process, and some decision-making types of inquiry are made during the pre-lodgement process.
Our staff, that
Yep.
there's somehow
Sorry,
are out of order.
I think the local board member has finished in the reply. Can I call Councillor Pennyholz for the last question?
Thank you. So I'm
Did
now
you
a little
finish?
bit.
So sorry, I presume
I finished, yeah.
Yeah, I presumed you'd finished. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just a little bit unclear given the last bit of the conversation. So so this is a question of clarification. The pre-lodgement discussions that are talked about, my understanding as an elected representative, I've been a hearings commissioner and a councillor for a very, very long time. That's a critical discussion between the developer, our staff, our legal advisors.
Mm-hmm.
There's no room for politics in that, nor is there any room for members of the public. That needs to be in a trusting and confidential basis. So I'll go through. So I think we're agreed with that.
Mm-hmm.
Is what you're asking for post-lodgement the ability to go back and have a look at what some of those notes might have covered? Because I'm not too clear when you see yourself in the process. That's my first question.
Most of the time that we get a heads up is once the application has already been lodged through the weekly notification list, right? That's really, unless we were formally part of a pre-decision-making process, and planners had to formally notify us of every pre-lodgement meeting they were having, which God knows we wouldn't want, then you're right. It's access to information about pre-lodgement conversations or minutes after the fact, most of the time. Right? Sometimes there seem to be some applications which get lodged and then put on hold for one reason or another and then changed. There's variability, as you would know. But it's usually us seeking access to pre-lodgement minutes from a list of applications that have since been filed.
So I think the question I really want to ask Mr. Mayor, is as part of any agreement that would be formed between local boards and our staff about access to information, would the local boards be prepared to have a corresponding level of agreement around confidentiality and respect for the legal process, because we are engaged in what I could only call a complete schmozzle with the current application in Oraki for a plan change, and we're now possibly going to end up in court with that. Because I think unless the boards are prepared to sign up to a very clear code of conduct around this information, we need to safeguard our legal spend, our legal rights, and we also need to safeguard the ability for our developers to have a clear, uninterrupted and unfettered process without politics interfering. So would there be an agreement to sign up to a code of conduct around this with local boards?
So my answer to that, Councillor Penny, Mr Chair, would be that firstly, the Oraki Point plan change doesn't involve the same principles that we're discussing today. Secondly, that the elected reps, all of us, are already subject to codes of conduct which are very clear about our duties, and I don't think that would be needed. Any extra agreement layer would be necessary because what's there is perfectly good and in place.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Daniel Newman.
Just wondering if I've interpreted this correctly, because the activities of local government are subject to discovery through the Local Government Official Information Meetings Act. Any person can apply for information under the Lagoima, but it is not, the presumption of the Act does not necessarily oblige that elected members will receive information. They can apply for information. There's no guarantee that they should receive information, particularly if it relates to a private individual and a private individual's transactions. So what is it that you are needing? Because you're not entitled to know what a constituent in Oraki has applied for necessarily just because of your office. You're entitled to apply for it, but the information is only provided on the basis of the principle of availability unless there is a reason to withhold.
Do you want to comment on that? You're right that anybody could seek a Lagoima request and the principle of availability applies. What we're saying is that it would be to take Councillor Penny's point, it would be an unnecessary use of time, money, resource, etc. if a local board member needed to exercise a Lagoima request every time it were requested to see pre-lodgement minutes for a particular application once that application had been filed. And that the status of an elected rep as part of council in having access to that information should be treated openly as if there should be no fetters on that access, so long as the elected rep getting access to that information understands the thing that I responded to Penny's question, that there is a duty of confidentiality with it.
For me, the provision in the Act that gives you that privilege. You can't.
I don't have the Act in front of me, but I don't think that's necessary.
Well, the answer is that it doesn't exist. You can apply, but your role doesn't entitle you to information just because of your role. Your role entitles you, as an actual person, you're entitled to apply for the information. But there may be reasons why the applicant doesn't want you to have the information, frankly. And that's actually covered under the Act because there are privacy considerations under the Privacy Act, but also under Lagoima. I think you're asking for something that you're not legally entitled to.
Well, we'll probably have to disagree on that, but
Okay. Right, I think I'm going to terminate. We've reached the half hour set aside for this. I think we've had a good exchange of views, and I hope that you found that helpful, and there will be ongoing discussions around it. There are conflicting principles here, and there may be some ways around it, and obviously council officers treat this on a case-by-case basis because in some cases pre-application information is available to the board. In other cases, there's commercial confidentiality. So, Councillor Simpson, can I ask you to move the motion of thanks, please? And we have a seconder for that, Councillor Fletcher.
Good. Thanks for your time, folks.
Sorry, we'll just move the. Oh, it's been moved. Sorry, yeah. I'll take it as read. It's on the board that the Councillor Simpson has moved that we thank you for your attendance. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you very much, and thank you to officers as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to item number 8 of extraordinary business, and I want to move the motion that will be on the screen in front of you that we consider an extraordinary item supporting Christchurch and providing feedback to government on the proposed gun law reform.
I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Hulse. The reason for the fact that it's not on the agenda is that actually the government announcement, particularly in relation to gun law reform, was made only last Thursday. So this is the first opportunity and the only opportunity to get this on the board. And the law will be passed under urgency before the next meeting of this body. But over and above that, I think all of us would expect that given the magnitude and the trauma of the events in Christchurch, that this governing body should acknowledge those events, formally pass on our sympathy and support some of the initiatives that are being taken. So it's been moved and seconded that this be an item of extraordinary business. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. And if I can then, as I foreshadowed, indicate my desire to move this item from the bottom of the agenda to a more appropriate place in the agenda, which I think is now. And I'd like to move the formal recommendation that is there. I'll go through it in a minute. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Holtz again, thank you very much. I think Friday, now nearly 3 weeks ago, there wouldn't have been a person around this table that did not share with the rest of New Zealand a sense of shock and disbelief that a terrorist attack of this nature and the trauma that it caused, the families of 50 people, some of them children, 3, 4 years old, men and women that, as you read their stories, you understand that they were decent, good people. They were people, in some cases, that came here to escape this very sort of trauma, thinking of New Zealand as a safe haven. And all of us, I think, responded with a sense of grief, of obviously the desire to pass on our sorrow to those that were directly affected, a sense of anger that this could have happened in our country. This is not a country where we have major conflict around people's ethnicity or around their faith, but also a sense of despair, actually, that this could have happened here, that perhaps rather naively in an age of innocence we believed that it would not happen in New Zealand, but it did. I want to say that in the 3 weeks that have passed since then, that sense of despair I felt initially has been replaced with a sense of hope and really actually a sense of pride. I've been immensely proud of the way New Zealanders have responded, and I think I've done about 12 to 15 gatherings around the city, but everywhere I've gone, just to see people reaching out first and foremost to the Muslim community and the victims, the families of the victims, with that absolute sense of solidarity and support and actually beyond that, love. And I use that word love advisedly, we don't use it very often, but in the context of an individual that acted out of sheer hate simply because somebody's faith was different from their own, I think that word love is an appropriate one because, you know, if you look at any of the great faiths, they all teach that love will prevail over hate, and it does, and that good will prevail over evil, and it will. So it's it's been a remarkable sense of time, and you know, part of our Auckland plan is to be an inclusive society. And you know, as I look around at my colleagues around the table, I don't think that there's anyone here that does not believe fundamentally in a multicultural and a multi-faith society where every individual can practice their faith freely and safely, and every individual is encouraged to be proud of their cultural identity, because that's what we are as Auckland. We are one city, but we are many different peoples. And I just think of, I was at the Avondale Mosque on Sunday, and somebody from, I think it's called Love Avondale, a Pacifica guy got up with his guitar and sang Stand By Me. And the mood and the emotion was really quite tangible in the room. And then going to the El Medina school out in Mangere with Alf, Councillor Filipina, and seeing these young Muslim boys get up and do a haka. It was quite a fierce haka, Councillor. But the subliminal message there is that we are proud of our cultural identity as New Zealanders, but we are just as proud as Muslims from all over the world, and there are many, many different ethnicities there. And I think equally we were proud when we saw the way in which our Prime Minister, you know, gosh, I was at the Ponsonby Mosque and Nikki Kay stood up and actually, I think in a very gracious way, just acknowledged that level of leadership that said to the world, the person that committed these atrocities are not us. Our values are different. And she epitomised that, I think, with her expressions and with her wearing of the hijab. And that beautiful picture of the police constable in Christchurch, you know, body armour, bushmaster, automatic weapon, but wearing a rose and a hijab, saying, actually, we are here to support you and we are here to protect you. So I think some really positive things have come. But there is something else that I think, there are a number of things that have to happen. One of them is around a hardcore of people that I would describe as neo-Nazi. I encountered them actually last year when I spoke out against the Canadian alt-right extremists wanting to come here to demean Muslim people. And their ideology is vicious, it's vile, it's what my father and his generation fought against in the Second World War. And, you know, you have to think, and I'm glad we've got a Royal Commission, that we need to be watching these people just as closely as we watch the extremists from any other group. And there is no place for them in New Zealand as far as I'm concerned. But beyond that, I think of people that I know personally and what they put up on Facebook, and they share jokes, and it's what I describe as casual racism. But we actually don't have any place for that in New Zealand either. And I think that, you know, rather than just dismissing them as idiots as we tend to do, actually we've got to call them out and say they are not our values as a nation. We are proud of our nation, which is multicultural. We see diversity as enriching us, not dividing us. We are determined to create in this city and this nation of ours a country where every one of our children can grow up together in a safe, a stable and a harmonious environment. Tomorrow, there is a national commemoration event. I tried hard to get Yusuf Islam to appear at our rally, commonly known as Cat Stevens, but he is appearing in Christchurch. Our occasion will be at Eden Park, starting with prayers at 1:30 and a ceremony sometime after 2. But I can announce here that Dave Dobbin will be appearing, among other performers of waiata and haka and songs. And having heard Dave Dobbin sing Welcome Home at Passchendaele on the 100th anniversary, it will be a moving and an emotional occasion. So I'd encourage councillors, if you can make it tomorrow, to show your support and your solidarity. Can I finish just with the resolution that's in front of you? The first thing, obviously, to mark our support and sorrow and love for the families in the Muslim communities, to reaffirm our belief in an inclusive, peaceful and harmonious society, that to support initiatives that promote multiculturalism and a multi-faith society, and to show zero tolerance. D is a specific clause, and it's to support the removal of military-style semi-automatic weapons from our community and to strengthen gun laws. And again, I'm really pleased to see a cross-party approach to that in Parliament. People putting aside their political differences and say the gun lobby has had too much say for too long, and there is no place in our community for weapons designed to kill people and to kill them quickly and in large numbers. Without MSSAs, the scale of this tragedy would have been hugely smaller. And finally, to request me to send a letter on behalf of all of us backing up those resolutions. Can I just mention, I've had foreshadowed by Councillor Newman an amendment to talk about buyback. That is implicit in what the government has announced. There will be a buyback. That's how the weapons will be removed. And that will cost, I think they've estimated, maybe over $100 million, but it's there. So thank you for your resolution, Councillor, but if you can take that as implicit in what the government has announced, well, explicit actually in what the government has announced, I'd appreciate that very much. So I'm sorry that's a little long, but I think the nature of the occasion is such that it justifies us taking time out today from our normal business to discuss this. I've had a number of people that have signalled already. I'd better go through my list that I've got here, beginning with Councillor Hills.
You first, Daniel.
I'm sorry, I'll take it in any particular order. Councillor Newman.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I support the intent of this and appreciating your comment. The reason why I think that we should be explicit on the issue of the buyback is that the buyback is going to be controversial because banning the importation of military-style semi-automatic and other semi-automatic weapons is one thing, but there are a lot of those weapons already in our community, and I would imagine that the ban will be supported, the buyback will be more controversial, and there will be some people in the community who I suspect would even want to go further, and that is registration of individual firearms. So I support what you are seeking to do here, and you have you included the words "and strengthen gun laws in New Zealand." I can endorse that. My hope is that we can be explicit on the buyback, because that will be a matter that will be hotly contested. Notwithstanding what the mood is in the community right now, I have no doubt that there will be pressure, and I would like to stand full square in favour of the buyback. I have some sympathy for the issue of individual registration, but I think that that's going to be too hard. But even then, there may be some colleagues who actually support individual firearm registration. So, Your Worship, I wonder actually, maybe as an alternate on D, you could reflect or codify that there will be support the removal. Note that this would include the buyback, notwithstanding the cost of it. I'm not going to go as far as to request individual firearm registration, but I'm sure that there'll be some who will like the idea and may wish to speak to that too. So I'll be voting for this, but I wondered if you could just maybe make that a little bit more explicit on D.
Okay. Thank you. If I can just respond to that very quickly, because I'd really like this resolution to be unanimous, and I'm sure you feel the
Which
same
I'm
way,
gonna vote
Councillor. So I'm happy to amend it to remove military-style semi-automatic weapons from our community, including a buyback of such weapons.
Yeah.
And that covers it. The strengthening gun laws is kept broad because we haven't seen the specific proposals yet, but it may include individual registration. Thank you very much. So we'll get that up on screen, and we'll come back to Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. Yeah, just first of all, obviously strong thoughts and condolences still with our Muslim community, and especially those families affected directly by the horror we saw, strangely enough, only 13 days ago, Mayor Goff. So not 3 weeks, not even 2 weeks yet. Just feels like so much has passed.
It feels like 3 weeks.
Feels like a very long 2 weeks. I heard it on the radio on the way home from a community meeting on the Friday, and just you sort of don't expect it to be hearing those sort of things from in our country. And but talking, unfortunately, to our Muslim community over the last 2 weeks, many of them have said they were acutely aware this was coming or could come at any time because of much of the hate they see online and much of the sort of aggressive behaviour many of them feel in our communities that we obviously don't take seriously enough. I mean, many of us do, but obviously we brush it off a bit too much. So I think it's horrendous what happened, but I think many people have expected this type of potential to happen, and we just need to make sure we're being more vigilant and more careful and standing up to this sort of racist rhetoric, calling it out, reporting things on Facebook and Twitter, which I've been doing quite a lot before, but much more now. And unfortunately, things are not being removed still. They're being left up, saying they don't violate community standards when there's horrendous things out there. So it has been sad but amazing to see the community come together. You know, I spoke at our North Shore Mosque on Friday night, and just the people there and the community coming together, and also the Muslim community saying, please come again, please keep coming, you're all welcome whenever. And I think many in the community have been maybe a little sad that they never either knew, you know, it was both sides. People from the Muslim community saying they wish they'd invited people more often, but were scared they wouldn't come. And a lot of people saying, I wish I'd thought about asking. So I think we shouldn't need these terrible things to happen for us to come closer together. But I think if there's one positive out of it that you could possibly ever think was positive, is that people are coming together. You know, seeing the call to prayer on TV, you know, that's something I've never seen in New Zealand. Once again, I feel sad that I've never seen, you know, to that size or scale. But it was actually pretty beautiful to see everyone coming together like that. Yeah, I think we all have an obligation as elected members to call out this sort of stuff, make sure our communities are feeling included, no matter where they come from or what their faith is or what their relationships are or what has happened in their life. So I think we do brush it off. You know, we get horrendous stuff sent to us, to staff, to other things. I think we need to constantly keep on top of that because we never know how far these people might go. And I think it's on all of us to make sure that we are keeping that on. So thank you for these resolutions, and also thank you to you, Mayor, and to, I know many of, I think everyone around this table has been doing a lot of work, and it has taken a lot out of many of us to be around our communities at such a sad time. But yeah, I want to thank you, especially with the leadership you've shown around the community. You've been everywhere, and people have been saying so, and it's been genuine because you've always sort of fought for those sort of things. But yeah, thank you. And yeah, main thoughts go back to the communities, especially the Muslim communities in Christchurch, who you know, will take a very long time for them to move forward over this. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor, for those words. Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I think it's highly appropriate today that we pause and reflect on that.
Sorry, mic, Councillor, please.
I think it's highly appropriate that we pause and reflect on what has happened to our country over the last 2 weeks. And so I commend you for bringing this matter forward to us today. as Councillor Newman has referred to, there are some of us who feel that if we are going to move forward, that there must be some consideration in the future. There must be some time for Parliament to come together and prioritise the need to register all guns. I understand the practical difficulty around that, and I also understand the importance of actually making changes very quickly on those weapons that can cause just such grief as has been the case. So I'm not, I would like to feel that we haven't closed the door on that opportunity as we go forward. I also want to just pause and say how much I have appreciated the Prime Minister through this period. My late father, who'd served during the Second World War, came back, and he, as a small child, he had every single speech and memoir of Winston Churchill, and I was sort of confused by that as I sort of grew older and asked him lots of questions, and he said to me that it was Churchill's words that had inspired him in his darkest times. And I think it's fair to say for many of us that the Prime Minister has really inspired us in our darkest times, and for that I will be always grateful. Whatever our differences might be at a political level, I think she has been outstanding and has shown remarkable fortitude as she's led the country as well as comforted the country through this period of time. I would also like to acknowledge, and I wonder whether in the interests of trying to get support from everyone, but the Mayor, Leanne Dalziel, I also believe has been outstanding for, you never anticipate that these events are going to happen, and the way in which she led her council and the support and cooperation and the collaboration that took place, I just wonder whether we should acknowledge the Mayor, Leanne Dalziel, and the people of Christchurch in some way, that the support we can show them and the gratitude for their response, in addition to all of the many first responders, the staff and volunteers and others. But I just wonder whether you would consider actually incorporating that into the resolutions that are before us.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Chris Darby.
Thanks, Mayor. And Mayor, I note the first motion there. Sorry, thank you. With the mic. Mayor, I note your first motion is the most important motion before us. And I think every councillor, mayor, of course, extend my heartfelt sympathy to the families that have to deal with the result of the 15th of March and all their friends and the thousands affected by this, and they go well beyond our shores. And particularly to the brothers and sisters of Islam. 50 beautiful people killed, as pointed out there. It's never, ever before. And the thing was, they were quietly practicing their faith. Quietly practicing your faith, praying, meditating, and to be exterminated like that. Extinguished by violence we've never, ever witnessed before. I guess, Mayor, there is work to do as a nation. I don't guess, actually. I know there's a lot of work to do in this nation and in our city, and it goes well beyond gun laws. And while the gun laws are a very important first response, I would suggest that addressing true inclusion in our society right across Aotearoa is going to take a lot more work. And I'm sure the government has that in mind. If we are going to embed a multi-faith society in this country. And in some ways, this attack is a manifestation of the rejection of our multi-faith diversity. Because this, at its seed, is about faith. And we have to be careful that we don't add in a lot of other areas of diversity to weaken the key point that this is about multi-faith diversity. And we talk about inclusiveness, but I'm not sure we're necessarily doing it. In fact, I know very well that we're not doing it. We recognise it, but we've got to translate that. We've got to convert that into true actions and true results. We recognise diversity of language, ethnicity, nationality, sex, gender, but the real question is how much room are we making for multi-faith, religious diversity? And that is the challenge here. And we, as Aucklanders and New Zealanders, have to recognise that we have to look beyond the multi-Christian Auckland and the multi-Christian New Zealand and recognise it as a multi-religious Auckland and New Zealand. I have deep sorrow for these 50 beautiful lives lost, young, old, and lots of life to be lived and no longer for them. Yes, to the tightened gun laws, they are an important first start, but the point that I make is I think that this is not just the responsibility of government to respond, it is also the responsibility of the city to respond. That is Auckland Council, Mayor, councillors, independent Māori statutory board members and local board members to respond. So my request of the Chief Executive's representative is to, from this item here today, to take away and to canvass what we need to do as an Auckland Council to ensure that we further open the door to a multi-religious society in Auckland.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I also want to just acknowledge the work you've done, especially as our Deputy Mayor's been away. And so you haven't had that bill here to actually share that load, but other councillors have really stepped up. So it's been a really amazing response from everybody. I think also I want to just say, yes, it's dreadfully sad we've lost 50 lives, but I think of the 50 people injured as well and the other people that witnessed this dreadful event. And for 50 people, and especially those young people, a little 3-year-old, a small mass and lots of bullets, the damage to that little baby will be lifelong. And I think of those people that will live actually maimed for the rest of their life, physically and mentally. And that will be the challenge for us as a community to keep caring about those people, because they will need support probably for some of them for the rest of their lives. And so that's, and I suppose my nursing background sort of pops up, you know, I think of that. And also what I really want to acknowledge my West Auckland community. I went to 3 interfaith services, one only 2 nights after it happened at the Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saint Church in Lincoln North. And what I really noticed about that was that they don't open up very often. They're quite a closed community, a very large community, but they don't often open up. And they honestly were the first in our community to do that. And that spoke volumes to me, that they felt that it was really important to do that. And then our Hindu temple, Sri Ram Mandir in Henderson, opened up an interfaith prayer. And then our mosque. But what I also see around that is that it's not just us learning more about Islam, it's learning more about all the different faiths and having those interfaith conversations. And what was really apparent to me at all those services, and the one at Ranui Mosque last Friday night where you came, Mr. Mayor, was that it's opening all of our eyes up to other people's faiths, but also what we're seeing is that there aren't actually many differences. All we all want is for our families to flourish and be safe in this country. And so I think it's been an eye-opener for everybody that's participated. And the sadness for me is that we had an open day at our Ranui Mosque last year and a few sorry souls of us turned up. And it's taken this tragedy for us to open our eyes and open our arms. And I hope we don't have to continue in that vein, that we keep this up, because it's always the thing when you have a grief, it's the first 90 days, everyone's hanging around, everyone's supporting, everyone's caring, but then we get on with our lives. And I hope that this is going to be a permanent change in the way we relate to each other in this country. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Wayne Walker.
I won't repeat the earlier comments. Quite obviously, I share the sympathy. I'll just raise a few issues quickly that aren't covered off here. Quite obviously, the Christchurch City Council is obviously going to be considerably burdened by this issue, and I just wonder how our council is able to assist in whatever way we can. Quite obviously, we've done that with other instances where other parts of New Zealand have suffered through calamities or the like. The other matter is that, yes, we have these resolutions. Local government New Zealand conference is coming up in July. I'm making the assumption that our council might be putting some remits forward that go to issues around this. The other matter that I'll raise just quickly is that our council obviously has some guns, certainly across parks, and I'm making the assumption that we've already acted on this, and further to that, that we have a register of those guns. And then there are some other matters that I won't raise now, but quite obviously there are ramifications that go to security and other things that we need to act on generally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Fisso-Collins.
Thanks, Sir, and really good that you've brought this motion to the table. I want to also stand with other councillors in expressing our deepest condolences to the Islamic community in Christchurch and those who have been affected, both in Christchurch, throughout New Zealand and across the world, because many families have been affected by this. I wanted to focus my thoughts, though, sir, on I wrote about this in an opinion piece, and I'm interested in your comment about hope, because I hear what you're saying, that we can see some hope. One of the things that I allowed for the contrast for me was the absolute despair I had at watching the news on that day, on that Friday afternoon, as everything was starting to develop. The news agencies were putting everything out, and the level of shock and despair and dismay that I was feeling. And for me, if there was a little bit of hope that I could see at that time, it was the fact that at the same time that we were getting these reports, we were standing amongst thousands of students who'd taken the day off to protest climate change. And for me, that probably recognised a little bit of that hope that existed, that young people were prepared to speak up. And regardless of the issues of whether we agreed that they should be away from school, the fact is they were finding their voice. And yet on the contrast, on the other side, you had people kneeling before their God, expressing their voice to their Islamic God, and they were brutally slaughtered. And for me, that was the picture of that day. I want to focus my comments again on part C2 of what you've got there. You see, so some of the reason why I don't have as much hope is because some of us live with racism every day. Some of us endure this kind of poor treatment every day. I go home to them on the train every day. Some of us just live with it. We just accept it, that that's the way it is. And you look at the Children's Commissioner's report that came out on how children feel in classrooms, so many Māori, Pacific and Muslim kids even expressed how they believe teachers have low expectations of them. And that was for them a form of casual racism. The Human Rights Commission released a report on New Zealand's racism only 4 years ago, and again it was alerted and highlighted there. And we go way back to the Native Schools Act of 1867, where Māori was banned, that schools were only allowed to instruct in English. And even today, look at what society says. Look at all the polls you get on the AM show, the breakfast show, when people are trying to encourage more Māori speaking in our schools. And in the main, New Zealanders come back and are aghast at the idea. You see, sir, some of us live with racism every day. Our own regulatory bylaw feedback says that if you are tall, brown, male, and wear a hoodie, Auckland is scared of you. That's me. The point I'm trying to make is this is a brutally racist act. And if we're going to create the conditions for a tolerant and caring, compassionate and inclusive society, then we must confront the racism that exists in this country, in this city, head on. Yes, tighten the gun laws. Yes, let's do our best to get a register. Those things are important. But if our drive is to prevent this from ever happening again, we must create the conditions for an inclusive society. And so it is with those sentiments that I'm hopeful for an ecumenical gathering of Aucklanders, one that isn't a faith that's been talked about today, but one that learns to accept that we are different and that we can respect that difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor and Councillors, not only for your contributions today, but looking around the table, I've seen so many of you at so many of the functions, and I'd be remiss if I did not mention the Chinese community, because on the Friday night that this awful event happened, I spoke at a meeting of the Teochew people who were gathering in Auckland to have an international meeting, and I explained why I was late at that meeting, and beginning that night they started a process that saw them collect $2.3 million that we have been able to forward to the Christchurch Foundation to help the victims, $2.3 million. And these were people that were both local and international, but again, that was an act of extraordinary generosity. I've got a late addition to my speaking list, Councillor Alf Filipaina.
Yeah, my apologies for being late to put my hand up, but Your Worship, for me, I just wanted to acknowledge and support our staff at Auckland Council. I mean, look, yes, we're speaking, I'm not going to canvass what other councillors and what many people over the last few days have, but just our staff. And it's actually, Your Worship, the morning tea that you had and also the press service that we had here. I actually walked across Aotea Centre, and I saw some of the staff there that just sort of said, hey, hi, how are you? Just that. So I just employ our people around this table, but in this room, to do that, just to sort of say hi, not only to our Muslim staff, but I think to everybody. So that's my little sixpence, Your Worship.
Thank you, and that was a point I omitted. I've got to say that I have had fantastic feedback from our Muslim staff, and they probably number in their hundreds, that they feel really well supported by Council and what Council has done. And Phil, if you can take back our thanks to the Chief Executive for that. They have come back and they said, they were hugely distressed on the Friday night, but the support and love that they've got from the council organisation and their fellow workers has been hugely impressive. So thank you to all of our people in Auckland Council, and Alf, I know you had a big part to play in that as well. I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I'm happy to note that was passed unanimously, and I think every councillor for their support in that respect. Councillors, we come to item number 9, which is the update on the response of Auckland Transport to the recommendations of the Governance Framework Review. My office has had a number of approaches from councillors to say that, well, they like aspects of what's in this paper, that councillors have not had the chance to workshop this, and they would appreciate the chance to workshop that. I think there's 4 councillors that have approached my office. So I'm going to suggest that rather than move this item now, that we defer the item pending a workshop to enable us to have direct communication with AT and our council officers. So you're happy to support? I don't know whether we need to move and second it, do we? And well, we can. I'll move, and it's seconded by Councillor Simpson. Councillor Walker?
I just want to raise a related issue, and yes, I'm totally supportive of the protocols with Auckland Transport. Equally, we need to have a set of protocols with all the other council-controlled organisations. And the issue that I've raised with Phil is if we can expedite that, so that instead of dealing with Auckland Transport and then having a process that could amount to quite some months dealing with the others, that we actually pull it together. Because if you have a look at the protocols, essentially they're principles, and they could apply equally to any of the other CCOs. And I guess in that respect, the question I would ask is, what's the difference? So by all means, yes, let's have a workshop that goes to Auckland Transport, but if we can consider it more broadly, that'd be great.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's a fair point, and I think that we could address that in the workshop, and maybe we can expand it beyond simply Auckland Transport. Okay, it's been moved and seconded for the deferral of this item. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We come now to item number 11 on the agenda, the panel report on public safety and nuisance bylaws. And if I can invite Pania Elliott and Katarina Maki to the table, and if I can ask Councillor Linda Cooper as the chair of the regulatory committee. Oh, sorry, I've jumped. I'm on 9, not on 11. Wishful thinking. We're on 10. Okay, so let me start that one again. It's item number 10, and it's Ross. I just presumed that this was so straightforward. We'd already passed it, Ross. I will ask Councillor Simpson to move this motion. I'll second it. And Ross, it's quite straightforward. Perhaps you could speak to the item and the scope of the review that's being proposed for human resources.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Your Worship. This is the latest review in the organisational support group of activities. It will cover the value chain from a human resources perspective. So how do we set the strategy? How do we determine the capabilities that we need? How do we recruit, induct, train people? How do we reward them? How do we look after staff's well-being and their health and safety? How do we manage performance, and how we run payroll? The review will start in early May and should be concluded in September this year. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. This is, of course, referred to this committee by appointment, performance review and value for money committee. But if there are questions, yeah, Councillor Wayne Walker. Can we have your microphone on, please, Councillor?
So I'm looking at the item, and quite obviously the context is value for money. So how much money do we spend across the council group on human resources?
So at this point in time, I don't know how much we spend on running the human resource function, but we spend close to $800 million in terms of staff costs across the year, across the group.
Okay, so I'm just suggesting, Mr. Mayor, that it would be useful to have that information, and I'm not knocking human resources. I'm entirely supportive of that function. And just in respect of the idea of you know, value for money and performance review, I'm assuming that we're obviously looking at the money, but we're in particular looking at efficiency and how we can have better performance across that area. Essentially, that's my understanding.
Yeah, and through the chair, I mean, the legislation, Section 17A of the Local Government Act, asks us to review the cost effectiveness of our services. We have expanded that to make it wider, to capture the elements you're talking about, Councillor, in terms of performance and have we set ourselves up for success in the future. And so to be able to look forward as well as to look historic as part of these reviews.
Just further to that, my particular concern goes to issues around health and safety, the well-being of people across the organisation and the place that human resources has in that. Because we know from studies, reviews, that at times we're not the best performing organisation across some of those issues.
Thank you. Councillor Fesso-Collins.
Thanks, Chair. Just interested in what the diversity and inclusion lens over the review process will look like.
Through the chair, at this stage, we have not scoped out the review, so I haven't done detailed planning. Post the terms of reference, we'll do detailed planning, which then, you know, on the quarterly reporting back to the APR VFM committee and how we're progressing. But I haven't actually scoped any of the review beyond the terms of reference at this stage, as into how we will do the work.
Thank you.
Supplementary, Sue?
Yep, further question, Councillor.
So I guess, is there an intention then to use the current framework? We've got a diversity and inclusion framework. The CEO has to respond, or part of his KPIs, whatever we call it, includes that. There will be that consideration made in looking at the review overall. So not looking at what you're going to do post the terms of reference, but that's going to be a guiding view on getting to the terms of reference.
Yes, and through the chair, yes. You know, to look at the framework, is it fit for purpose and is it delivering the outcomes that we're seeking? Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any further questions? Are there any comments? If not, the motion is to approve the terms of reference for the Human Resource Management Services Review. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Now, this time we will get to item number 11, the panel report on public safety and nuisance bylaw. And we have Paul Wilson, and you're on your own, Paul, are you? Oh, Panya Elliott here. I will ask also Councillor Cooper to move the recommendation. Do we have a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Collins. And do you want to begin, or would you? Yeah, I'll invite Councillor Cooper to introduce it.
Panel recommendation. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the panel's presenting its recommendations on proposed changes to the public safety nuisance bylaw. I had on the panel with me Councillor Casey, who is at a funeral today, Councillor Newman and IMSB member Renata Blair. The Regulatory Committee completed the review of the bylaw as is required on a 5-yearly review in June 2018, and the review found the bylaw was generally working, but there were some changes that were needed to better protect people from nuisance and unsafe behaviours and activities. That statement of proposal that was put together and adopted unanimously by the Regulatory Committee was then adopted unanimously by the governing body in September 2018 to go out for consultation. So the proposed changes seek to better protect people from nuisance and unsafe behaviours and activities in public places. And I won't read them all out, but they're in paragraph 13 on page 45 of the report. Local boards, mana whenua and mata waka and key stakeholders were specifically notified about the proposal, and we had feedback from them. The public had the opportunity to provide feedback in a variety of ways, including writing, online, email or post, or verbally at 5 public have your say sessions around the region and a stakeholder one-on-one session and a hui for rangatahi Māori. Though the have your say events out in public weren't well attended, but we had a lot of online feedback. So we had approximately 1,865 individual feedback responses, and I just want to clarify something that Councillor Collins said earlier. There wasn't any overwhelming trend that said that people were afraid of young brown men in hoodies. One person said that. So I just want to be clear, because I don't want people to think that Aucklanders think that generally, and that wasn't the feedback that we got, and that wasn't canvassed. So we deliberated on the public feedback received on the 18th of February, and our recommendations are summarised by the topic in Table 1 on page 45 of the report, and more detail in Attachment A. We actually, the recommendation supported the intent of the proposal. We thought it was very sound, and the public thought it was sound. And there were just 2 minor amendments for that weren't unanimous. One was the proposed changes clarifying rules about scattering of ashes, which Councillor Newman and IMSB member Renata Blair opposed. And that wasn't the scattering of ashes in the regional parks. It was a general request from Ngāti Whātua to ban that. And then a recommendation to decline prohibiting vehicles on Muriwai and Kareatahi beaches, as these will be reviewed when the AT traffic bylaw review commences, and we thought as a panel that was the better place to address that, as these beaches are considered as a public road. And member Renata Blair opposed that. So we asked that the governing body approve the panel recommendations and adopt the bylaw as amended by the panel. I want to really thank Councillors Casey Newman and IMSB member Renata Blair, because it was a lot of work and a lot to get through. We're also, the panel's here to answer any questions, and our staff, but Mr. Mayor, I would like to add, they've been added up there and you've accepted them, I hope, because the matter of ash scattering and artefact placement is an issue, but we felt to outright ban it at the panel was, we did not have, when we asked the question about, we talked about no ash scattering in regional parks, that was what went out to the public, not a general ban, and we didn't think the public had enough information or opportunity to comment on that. So we didn't think it was appropriate to do that in this process. But what I undertook to do, as I said at the panel with Councillor Newman and IMSB Renata Blair, was to actually put this piece of work on our books. I have been struggling with this for the last 5 years, because there's definitely a clear conflict between different cultures and different needs in our community. And so I think we need to have a much bigger conversation in our community about this, and having a resolution on the books that we ask the Chief Executive to instruct council departments to look at this and report, to create a framework for this discussion for our community, I think would be the most helpful way forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And our staff are here to ask questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and can I repeat your thanks to yourself, Councillors Casey and Newman and Renata Blair. I know you've put a huge amount of work into this, and the report we're receiving is an end product of that work. Is there anything, Paula Pania, that you wish to add to Councillor Cooper's comments?
No, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Right, so it's open to questions. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Got a few questions. Essentially, they go to set netting, which has been a priority issue for the community that I represent. And first of all, just for clarity, page... Trying to find page 52, just mentions retain current council set netting restrictions. So I'm making the assumption that the restrictions that are in place at Arkles Bay, Omaha and the like remain in place? Correct, right? Then later it says any new set net bans must be made through a separate process. It doesn't describe what that process is. Could you clarify that?
Certainly, through the chair, so the current bylaw had a process in place to receive requests for further setting bans. That's how the Arkles Bay and current bans were put in place. This bylaw has kept that framework. What it's done is to clarify how that framework works, but the process is much the same. Whereas before they made a request, they will still make a request.
Okay, great. And then the other matter is just an error or omission. So I'm looking at page 71, part 10. And point 1 says the council may restrict or close entry to the whole, in brackets, or part of any council or more. So I'm assuming the words that are missing are council-controlled public place or the like. So that's just a correction, really. Okay?
Thank you. We'll note that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. With no other questions, we'll move straight to commentary. Is there anyone that wishes to comment on the recommendations? You've got a question, Councillor Desley-Simpson.
Sorry, Worship. I thought there'd be quite a few questions and there isn't, so that's actually quite positive. I just want to ask a question around the aggressive and intimidating behaviour. Could you please clarify, just from my personal perspective, that has been removed, and my understanding is that that has been replaced by something that is more wider. Could you just give me some clarity around the reason for the removal and how potentially, if at all, that it's still covered but in a different way? I just need some clarity around that. Thank you.
Certainly, through the chair. I think the important thing to bear in mind is that in relation to any behaviour that is intimidating or aggressive or causes a nuisance, that was previously covered in the bylaw and it remains to be covered in the bylaw. The proposal simply sought to streamline and to clarify that that indeed is the case. So the bylaw has been drafted in a way that says any behaviour that causes a problem in a public place is unacceptable, and the bylaw can be used to address that issue. So it doesn't matter what the activity is, it's the behaviour that it focuses on.
Thank you. Further question, Councillor Simpson.
Supplementary, I hate to labour the point, but I just want to be absolutely clear. So if somebody asked me, is public begging covered in your bylaw, the answer would be yes. Is that correct?
So through the chair, the response would be if that activity is causing a nuisance or that person is intimidating another person, it is absolutely covered and always has been. Right.
So if that person was just begging quietly on their own in a shop window, that is no longer, that was that in it before, and has it been removed?
So to clarify through the chair, that was never in the current bylaw and never has been. It's always been the behaviours that we have been targeting.
Thank you. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to reserve my right to speak, but with respect to can you outline to me the continued discussions? Can you explain the continued discussions? Who are the parties to the continued discussions? And what is the time frame for resolution of those discussions?
Thank you, through the chair. And this is the matter that Jay talks to. So the task for staff and Jay is to develop that process that answers all of those key questions, and it has a time frame to bring that back to the committee. And at that point, we can establish how best to go forward.
If it is the case that by the conclusion of June, that we arrive at a point where there is a view that we actually do need to address this from a regulatory perspective, are we going to have to go and revisit this bylaw? And what will be the timing for that?
So through the chair, if that was the wish of the relevant committee or governing body, then that would be a matter for staff to put on its program. And yes, it would be an amendment to a bylaw, but that is a work programming issue.
Mr. Chair, can I just clarify, Jay?
Councillor Cooper.
Jay is to get a process together. That's what's going to be reported back, and it's going to go to Environment and Community, because at the moment it's not a regulatory issue. It is an issue around effect on our communities and our environment. And so Councillor Hulse has agreed that that is the right place for that discussion. So all that will come back in June to that committee is, here's the framework. Who's going to answer those questions. Who's going to be involved? How do we go about it? What is the time frame? And so we've never done this particular piece of work, and we need to carefully and sensitively find all the right people and have the discussion. So we won't have a decision about banning, not banning in June under this proposal.
Okay, any further questions, councillor? Otherwise, I'll call Councillor Mike Lee.
Mr. Mayor, I'm a little bit confused about the status of this plan as it relates to this bylaw, proposed bylaw, as it relates to the 2013 bylaw, which it amends and still uses the title, though it is substantially changed. The 2013 bylaw was a joint bylaw, if you will, under the responsibility of Auckland Council, where relevant, and Auckland Transport, where relevant. Can you explain to me, is this new proposed bylaw to be administered solely by Auckland Council, and there will in effect be another bylaw administered by Auckland Transport? Is that how it's working?
Yes, through the chair, that is correct. There are two bylaws currently that regulate public safety and nuisance behaviours in Auckland, and this bylaw is the Auckland Council's bylaw that addresses areas like parks and civic spaces, and the Auckland Transport bylaw, which is of the same name, addresses the similar issues that occur on land that they are responsible for.
So, if we pass this, there'll be two bylaws, public safety and nuisance bylaws of 2013, an updated Auckland Council bylaw, and a separate and not necessarily updated Auckland Transport bylaw. Is that the result?
That is correct. Auckland Transport is responsible for reviewing its bylaw, and that it has a program in place to do that.
And this bylaw has in effect exported or shucked off responsibilities that it believes properly belong to Auckland Transports. Is that correct?
Correct.
So there's not a joint administration of there's two separate bylaws. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chris Darby.
Yeah, just clarification on the I and the J. I can really understand what the members were addressing there. Just in terms of, were they addressing rivers and streams and marine areas?
No.
Through the chair, they were particularly concerned about the streams and rivers that run through the council parks, but waterways in general.
Not the receiving environment of marine areas and the scattering of ashes in marine areas.
I believe that they were concerned about just scattering of ashes in water per se, particularly in food gathering areas.
Sorry, clarification. Water per se, which is marine areas and rivers and streams. Is that what they're trying to convey there? Because waterway is not a water course. A water course is a river and a stream. A waterway is not. So I'm just, if it is water courses and marine areas, it probably needs to say that. And I'm just trying to get clarification. What were they asking for? Waterway is a place by which a vessel passes.
We can put the right.
I think it's a really good question, and having talked to people that are involved in this issue, it definitely relates to the marine areas and not just the streams. So maybe we could, with the approval of the mover and the seconder, just alter that to reflect that it is waterways and marine areas. Does that do the trick?
Well, I think it's water courses. A waterway is not a
water courses. Sorry, about your expertise. So water courses and marine areas?
Rivers and streams and the ocean or the moana.
Well, that would be easier for most people to understand.
Water courses and marine areas.
Water courses and marine areas. So with the acceptance of the mover and the seconder, we'll amend that accordingly. Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Thank you. Just on the aggressive and intimidating behaviour around begging, with the bylaws, I know we've got some bylaws in place now, but people tend to have to rely on ringing the call centre if there's a problem with this nuisance. And sometimes I just wonder, with the council staff, anybody walking past or driving, do they have to wait for something to be logged by a general member of the public, or can, if we have staff that are walking by and they see it, they can then act upon it? Because I know one of the things that happens constantly, just driving out of the council car park just where the Sky City is, there's quite often there's people that are begging there or window washing, and often members of the public, it's happened to me and it's happened to many people I've seen, where the window washers get quite aggressive if you don't want to pay them any money, you not always have cash on you, and they squirt soapy water all over your window, so you can't actually go with it, and you miss the green light, so you end up having to go and let them clean it, or you know, so it's quite aggressive out there. So one of the things that I hear all the time about our bylaws, we've got all these bylaws, but none of the really, they haven't really got the teeth, or action doesn't always happen to them. And sometimes if you ring up on the call centre and say that, you know, there's an issue somewhere, you're then told, well, there could be 2 or 3 days before we come back to you. Well, the problem's all moved on by then. So I think with the bylaws and the actions of the enforcement and everything all need to, something has to work a bit better. So have you got any comments on that?
Through the chair, yes, our compliance staff can act on things that they see, and the other thing just would be to point out that we do have city patrols as well, which assist with all those issues.
Okay, we come now for comment. So are there any councillors who would like to speak to the item? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Members, I had the dubious honour of chairing the 2013 Public Safety and Nuisance Bylaw, and its task was to amalgamate the various related bylaws of the legacy councils into one integrated bylaw. And given public safety and nuisance relates to the public, it was thought wise and sensible to ensure that Auckland Transport and Auckland Council, who have a joint authority over streets and public areas, work together and come up with one integrated plan that is easily understood by members of the public and readily enforceable by both agencies in cooperation. I am concerned that what was portrayed as a minor or routine review and amendment and updating of this bylaw is actually quite a radical change. Whole parts have been excised out, and the whole concept of an integrated approach by the Auckland Council family vis-a-vis the public has gone by the board. There is a tendency in all bureaucracies to say, well, this is not my department, it's somebody else's department. And you know, and I know that the public, because we're all members of the public as well, find this very frustrating at times. But what has happened here is this not in my department tendency is going to be unwittingly reinforced in contrast to what we agreed on in 2013. So that's quite a major procedural and philosophical change in the whole attitude of public safety and nuisance. The whole concept is to give, if not to ensure public safety, give the public reassurance that their concerns and even their fears are well understood and catered for by the council that takes their rates. And so, Mr. Mayor, I am disappointed that whole swathes of the original bylaw, I think it was part 1, have been completely removed, including the vex and quite emotive question in regard to begging, street begging. Back in 2013, there was significant pressure on the council from some quarters to ban begging altogether, as happens in some cities. We resisted that, but to take into account public concerns, we made it clear that intimidation and nuisance begging was an offence under the bylaw, something that the council would intervene on because the police would not. And if a member of the public cannot find relief in the council or the police, you would agree that that's not an entirely ideal or satisfactory situation. But that was the situation up until 2013. It was not in my department. We rectified that, and also we identified a range of behaviours that, in response to public concern, that we identified to give the people of Auckland some assurance that we had listened to them and that we had taken a measured approach in responding and catering for those concerns. So I have to say there was some resistance within the council to taking those steps. Council officers actually submitted, along with the public, which was questionable, and then same individuals attempted to deliberate on the outcome of the submission hearing, which the boom was lowered on. However, Mr. Mayor, I oppose the removal of the very modest, mild restrictions that we put in there to take into account members of the public and business people in the high streets, including Queen Street and other suburban areas, about problem begging. I think it's a negative, a retrogressive step, will leave the public confused and dissatisfied, especially as now, if we endorse this, there's going to be an entirely separate bylaw run by Auckland Transport.
Thank you, Councillor. We have Councillor Daniel Newman.
Your Worship, I'm not going to vote against the recommendations there, including I and J, but I just want to, for the record, restate the argument that I gave, and I think Renata Blair gave, because he voted with me on this, in relation to the scattering of ashes issue. The feedback came from Ngāti Whātua, Ngāti Whanaunga, excuse me, Whanaunanga, Ngāti Tiata and Tamaoho, and the reasons why they set out their opposition to the scattering of ashes is the kaitiakitanga that they exercise in relation to Tāmaki Makaurau, and they find the dispersal of ashes in waterways to be culturally inappropriate and abhorrent. Those were the reasons set out in the submission. Now, I accept that other members of the panel took a different view, but it was we moved an amendment, and the amendment was defeated on the casting vote. The amendment would have prohibited the scattering of ashes in all public waterways because mana whenua are kaitiaki, ashes in waterways are culturally inappropriate, and that we wanted to support the feedback from iwi. Now, I note that the reasons for the decline give that there is more time is required for continued discussions in a timely manner to reach, quote, a satisfactory resolution, end quote. Precisely what a satisfactory resolution means is not clarified because I suspect there wouldn't be agreement on that. So in some respects, we've kicked the can forward. I want to acknowledge the chair of the Regulatory Committee, Linda Cooper, who is clearly trying very hard to broker discussions for an outcome, and it would appear that we're going to try and formalise this into a process starting at the June meeting of the Environment and Community Committee. Good luck, because I suspect that we could end up in a situation where somebody will talk to somebody about something at some point, and that at some point subsequent we will have another discussion about this, and eventually we'll arrive back at the same debate about whether this is a practice that is permitted or whether it shouldn't be permitted. And I will be voting for the position that I took at the hearing, that this is not a culturally appropriate practice, and that I have particular sympathy for mana whenua, who are the guardians and who have identified that this is an abhorrent practice. And I think, Your Worship, if this is a matter that is to be brokered for a resolution, it will require your specific input, because I believe that the status of your office and the role that you have will be necessary to try and bridge what I think is quite a significant divide. So I support you and your intent around this, but I think that this will be a very difficult one, which is not going to ensure an easy resolution of some quite strongly held views, both for and against the scattering of ashes, for the reasons that have been set out by the submitters. And those submissions were relevant. We could have taken the opportunity to pass this. We haven't, but almost certainly it will be a matter that comes back for further debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Filipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Fully support the recommendations, especially I and J. And the reason I do that is because mana whenua, there are 19 that are recognised currently, and it gives the opportunity for the 19 to have a say. The interesting thing is that I know, no, look, I might get myself in trouble, so I'll shut up in regards to what I know. But look, Your Worship, I think it's important, and getting it back to the Environmental and Community Committee allows the committee of a whole to end up making at least recommendations after the consultative process has happened. So I have always been consistent that it's important that we go out, especially in this particular case, to all our mana whenua that we recognised in the 19. So I definitely support the recommendations, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Are there any other councillors wishing to speak? We'll have Councillor, Councillor Lee.
No, he's spoken.
I'm advised that it's too late for that because you've spoken, Councillor, is the advice I've got from officers.
Sorry?
Yeah. Just before we then come to Councillor Cooper's, will be address and reply to the motions. I just want to make a couple of brief comments. The first is in relation to ash scattering, and I think we've reached a sensible position here to go back to the interested parties to talk through and to try to find out whether there's some common ground. there is very clearly a clash in cultural practices. Among the mana whenua, it's wrong to scatter ashes at sea, though I think all of us are aware of many people that we've known that have followed that practice over time. For the Indian community, that is the place where they often scatter their ashes. And rather than imposing one cultural view on top of another, to try to find some sensible common ground where, and this is just a suggestion, perhaps we avoid the scattering of ashes where kaimoana is collected, that would make sense to me, or where people are swimming, but allow scope for both cultures to pursue what they traditionally believe in. That's the end point that I hope we'd get to. And Councillor, you know, that's not an easy solution to find. And local boards have approached me and said they've agonised over this and haven't been able to find a solution. But to simply come down and say, we're going to regulate this way, without going to the nth degree to find that common ground and to meet the sensitivities of two different cultures, would, in my opinion, be a mistake, which is why I support I&J. I just want to touch briefly on the question that Councillor Lee raised, and I accept the reason that he raised it. My understanding, and perhaps at the end of this, Councillor Cooper could confirm, or officials, but this does not derogate in any way from a ban on people begging in a way that willfully obstructs, disturbs, interferes with, alarms, distresses, intimidates, or harms. If it did that, I would be absolutely against the change. People sit quietly with a paper cup in front of them. I don't particularly like it, but it's not something that I think, and for the reasons that you expressed, Councillor Lee, you chose not to ban that. Where you are obstructing or intimidating people, absolutely, there has to be action. I think the problem is not with the bylaw, it's with the regularity with which we enforce that. And I listened to Councillor Stewart about the window washer, because I had that experience yesterday. That's actually now illegal by parliamentary statute, but still there's a guy that at the end of Federal Street that's there every day, and when you say, no, I don't want it, he goes ahead. So the problem we face is not that the bylaw doesn't exist to stop that behaviour, or in this case, the statutory control, but our enforcement of it. And I think that's where we've got to come back to focus on. The reason that I support this is, one, because it still does create that prohibition on aggressive begging, but I support it because it goes beyond that. And look, I don't care whether the person's a beggar, they've been drinking alcohol, or they're on drugs. If they are behaving in a way that willfully obstructs, disturbs, interferes with, alarms, distresses, or intimidates, we need to have that as unlawful according to our bylaw. And it's not just those on drugs or alcohol. From time to time, I find some fringe elements out there, either religious or political, that right up in your face, and you know they've got the right to put their point of view politically or on a religious basis. I have no problem with that, but equally they should be bound by a bylaw that says you can't go beyond a certain point where you're intimidating, obstructing, etc. And I think some of us have had that experience out on the street as well. So the question that I have actually to Councillor Cooper, in a summing up, can you please provide assurance that this in no way reduces our ability to stop aggressive begging, but simply extends it to a range of other practices that we would regard as equally undesirable because it intimidates and obstructs? So perhaps if if I can, if I can just seek clarification of that, Councillor.
I will, and I think we've had quite a few sweeping statements about what's been removed and being duck shoved, apparently. But if you look at page 77 in Schedule 1, it talks about begging activity. It is in there, And it says begging activity or soliciting on roads and footpaths next to a road are regulated by Auckland Transport Public Safety and Nuisance Bylaw. We don't have the jurisdiction there.
That's not right.
Well, so am I still got my speaking
No,
turn?
no, I'm sorry. Please continue,
and
Councillor.
So that is their job to do that. The other issue here is talking about the fact that we're not enforcing window washers. That became the law for the whole country a year or two ago, and now it is a police matter. It is, we don't have the ability to enforce that ban. So that is not in our jurisdiction anymore. It used to be, but a law of the country changed that. We didn't change that. We didn't move it away. So that's another clarity. The other issue is that we take a graduated enforcement approach to all our compliance, and that means high harm, quick response. Low harm, we might have to get you a bit later, and it will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. But that was adopted unanimously by our regulatory committee, and everybody supported that because we know that we need to put the resources where they're needed more quickly. Okay, so we're not going to race out when someone complains about the fence next door being 1 inch over the height allowed. We're not going to go there straight away. But if somebody's being harmed, intimidated, there's an obstruction that causes a nuisance or compromises safety of the public, we'll get out there immediately. And so that's how it works. The issue around, yeah, I guess there's not really much more for me to say. We want to address the behaviours, not certain people. We're not targeting certain named groups of people. That smacks of something else. We're targeting harmful or intimidating behaviour, nuisance behaviour, and that can happen with anybody. Anybody can do that. A person might not be begging, but they might be getting in your way. So we're to ignore them and only target the beggar. And I just hark back to the first item we had today around embracing people of difference and cultural diversity, and looking at a person that isn't the same as you and judging them because you don't like the look of them and expecting our staff to come along and get them out of your sight because it doesn't look good. That's not what we're trying to do here. But if that person, be they begging or not, is harming someone, yes, we go and deal with it. And we could say, what about students behaving badly when they've had a night out and they're drinking? Do we just target them? Do we target annoying politicians that keep walking across Aotea Square? No, we don't do that. It's about the behaviour. So I think that's what this is about. It is not going to diminish the amount of enforcement that we take up. So that I commend this to you, and also again thank the panel.
Thank you very much. So it's been moved and seconded. Point of order, Councillor Lee.
What's the point of order?
An amendment, and you suggested that I was unable to do that. And I said they've read amendments up there already, and I would like to call them on why, as an elected member of the governing body at a formal meeting, I cannot move an amendment to recommendations.
Thank you. I'm advised by council officers that you need to move the amendment before you speak to it and not afterwards. But I'll seek confirmation. That's.
Oh, well, I was foreshadowing that, Mr. Mayor, as I spoke, so that's no reason to shut down my rights, surely.
I'm sorry, Councillor, that's the ruling I'm giving on the advice of officers. We've now had the right of reply. So I'm going to put the motion.
Your Worship,
Councillor Fletcher.
Speaking to the concerns that have been expressed, I note that when we discussed recently the matter of the Eden Park grant, I chose not to speak because I wanted to move an amendment, and we chose during that debate to suspend standing orders in order that an amendment could be posed. I wonder whether we have that same opportunity today.
Well, I'm sorry, we've had the debate now, and it would be inappropriate to take any action of that nature retrospectively. I'm going to put the recommendations A through to J. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. It's carried with. Yep, that is certainly allowed, Councillor, and happy to do that. And I'm sorry, Councillor, you don't have the call at the moment. Councillor Walker, do you want? No. So carried, and Councillor Mike Lee wishes to have his opposition to that recorded. Councillors, we now come to item number 12, recommendations from the Regulatory Committee, Trade Waste, the statement of proposal. And if I can have council officers at the table, and once again request Councillor Cooper, as chair of the committee, to introduce the item. Sorry, could I ask you to move it too, Councillor?
Sorry, I will move.
And we have a seconder for that? Looking around for a seconder.
Hills might, he's on the committee.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is asking the governing body to adopt the Trade Waste Bylaws statement of proposal to go out for public consultation. So hopefully this won't be as contentious because it's actually sending this out to the public. We are required to complete a review of all bylaws within 5 years of being made. And really this is about protecting people, wastewater assets and the environment by minimising risks from potentially harmful subjects discharged from trade premises. So it's not a general public kind of bylaw, and it's very much involved with water care. So for that reason, the Regulatory Committee has appointed a panel to hear public feedback, which includes Councillor Hills as being very generous in saying he will chair that, Glenn Wilcox from the IMSB, and Catherine Harland as a Water Care Board member. And the panel will report back to the governing body to help make its final decision. So water care staff and our own staff are here to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody from water care or from council that would want to comment further on this issue? We've had it pointed out that this is a statement of proposal and will go out to consultation, but is there anybody that wants to make any further explanatory comment, or should we go straight to questions?
Straight to questions.
Right. Okay, Councillor Filipaina.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. You've got local boards and advisory panels, and obviously the Independent Māori Statutory Board comes to mind. So does it need to be included in this so then they get this report for their say as well?
Through the chair, we can put a recommendation in to say that it should be distributed to local boards and to panels is the normal one we do, and we always make sure that mana whenua are notified of proposals.
And Chair,
Councillor Filipaina.
I don't know if there's any other questions, but because they're not on the governing body, I just thought it'd be explicitly in there that the Independent Māori Statutory Board be forwarded this as well.
Okay. Think we can do that. Further questions? We come to comments. Are there any comments on this paper? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. The next item. Thanks very much for officers. We didn't work you or task you very hard today. Item number 13, which is the Auckland Council Group and Council Quarterly Performance Reports. Members of the governing body will recall that we did not complete consideration, particularly of the parent body. So welcome our officers to the end of the table. I was going to ask Councillor Clow to move this, but he's... we'll ask Councillor Simpson to do that. Have I got a seconder? which is basically to receive the performance report, Councillor Darby, and if I can invite, I'm not sure who's going to lead on this, Ross.
Okay, thank you. Right, as the Mayor just said, this is a continuation of last week's F&P item on quarterly performance for the period up until 31 December last year. So I'll just give a brief overview of the group level results and hand over to David Gurney and the team to talk about the council parent. So at a group level, CapEx delivery for the first 6 months of the new 10-year plan period got off to a very good, successful start. Solid CapEx delivery, 832 million over that period, 10% more than last year. Represents an 86% delivery against budget. Within that investment, there was some key highlights. You heard a lot of it from the CCOs last week. But some key highlights were significant progress with the Eastern Busway and 3 new cycleways, for example. So in terms of debt, debt at 31 December was 8.3 billion. So that was up about 60 million over the 6 months. And over the same period, assets were up by over 930 million. So while 8.3 billion is a large number, it should be seen in the context of $52 billion worth of assets for the group and an annual revenue in excess of $4 billion a year. So in terms of debt ratios, we are just tracking slightly under where we thought we'd be, but looking out over several years, we're pretty much in line with where we thought we'd be on a multi-year view compared to the 10-year budget. We are stable against our 2 credit ratings, so on stable outlook for both of those. So debt is pretty much tracking a little bit favourable at the moment, but broadly in line with where we thought we'd be. So moving to operating performance. So thinking about our controllable costs, the underlying position, so taking out things like interest, depreciation, one-off accounting entries and the like, and looking at the core controllable costs, was a very favourable group result, 38 million ahead of budget. On the revenue side, it was some strong revenue growth over that period, particularly driven by water volumes and consenting volumes. On the spend side, spend was also very favourable compared to budget, 21 million less than budget spent, and the biggest part of that was in the staff cost area, so a good result on overall costs and staff costs in particular. So looking ahead to the full year view, we're expecting that solid operational performance to continue. We can just see that continuation of those costs and revenue trends. We know in the parent that the results we're starting to see coming through January and February are still looking pretty good, and you heard from the CCOs directly last week. On the CapEx side, things are a little more challenging. We know it's a tough construction market. There's lots of cranes and activity out there, so that makes things pretty tough, both from a cost perspective and just a delivery perspective. So then looking into FTEs for the group. So group FTEs over the 6 months was up 393 FTE people, not millions, sorry. Switching gears, sorry.
Look at one. Thank you. We would be alarmed.
393 FTE, full-time equivalent people. So the biggest increase in that was the council parent, so you'll hear more from that shortly from the team there. Just briefly, the biggest drivers within that were in the regulatory space, and as we have more people to process consents, and the environmental space, more people to deliver environmental programs, and there's some seasonality aspects in there as well. In performance measures, 84 measures had a result for that 6-month quarterly period. Of the ones that had a result for that period, 71% were met, 29% not met. One of the key areas that remains an area of ongoing focus is regulatory services, some of the consent processing times, etc. And you'll hear an update from the regulatory team from James Hassel in a minute. So that's the, I guess, the overall of the group picture. If you haven't taken any questions, otherwise I'll pass over to the parent team.
Right. Before we move on to the parent body, are there questions arising out of this? I've just got one question. The increase in the FTEs comes after a almost no increase last year. Is that correct? Yeah. Secondly, the biggest percentage of these increases are in regulatory areas such as building consents, and that is self-funding. Is that accurate?
Correct, yeah.
Part of the increase, as I understand it, is also insourcing of previously contracted out work with a saving of $2.5 million. What sort of numbers are you talking about in that area?
So that's primarily in our ICT function. My understanding is about 40 or so people, but there's a paper coming through to APR VFM to provide a lot more detail in terms of those numbers.
And another major area of increase, I understand, is in the environmental area, consequential upon our efforts to through the targeted rate on water quality. So, and miscellaneous, I guess, like the Westgate Library. I suppose if we open a new library, we need to staff it as well. Local members, that's fine. That was just my one concern, but there seems to be a clear explanation. Councillor Filipaina, you had some questions?
Just one, Your Worship. The Auckland Transport, there's 33. Where did they lose the 33 staff?
Well, I'll come back to you on that to get you the exact detail.
Okay, that'll be great. And Your Worship, just again, when do we get the health and hold on. When is our next meeting with Auckland Transport governing body CCO? Do you know when that is?
We can find out and get back to you on that,
yes,
Councillor.
Please, because that'll be one
in
of
the diary, but it's not in my head.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, let's get on to the council parent group, and thank you.
So good morning, everyone. So I'll run through very quickly just an overview of the parent report. I will talk to the non-financial aspects and then pass to Robert Irvine for the financial aspects, and then we will get
David, can you just move your microphone a little bit closer to you, please? So
and then we'll get James Hassel to talk about regulatory and Ian Maxwell to talk about community services in a little bit more detail. So just a couple of highlights from the parent report. We've had quite a bit of success in the digital and transformational initiatives. We have won, we were the winner of the best use of emerging technology for our robotic process automation at the Association of Local Government Information Managers Forum, and also our Safe Swim and Leisure Consolidator Operating System were runners-up for awards too. So it's a good example of using technology, I guess, to drive efficiencies, but also making the work we do of customers smarter. And also there was the significant progress to restore and maintain natural forests. So there was the opening of the Kitikiti track over the, I think it was on Boxing Day. So it was great to see some of those tracks opening up, whilst we also managed Kauri dieback. In terms of risks highlighted in the report, we recognised three, I guess, most significant risks. First is the drug use and antisocial behaviour within the city centre. A few things happened over the half year with support from the Auckland City Mission. They helped us outreach and provide support services to homeless people. We've had some challenges in the recruitment area, particularly in departments such as regulatory. I think we've covered this issue numerous times before in these reports. We're increasing our focus on employee retention and engagement, and we're looking at training and development as well to try and make sure that we upskill staff in areas where there are skill shortages. And lastly, the capital program, as was mentioned with Ross, with the group, that is another key risk for us. It's a very large program, so that will always be a risk. It's one we're managing pretty well. I think at half year we were 96% spent against the capital program at that stage, so we are managing that. It's through an early engagement with suppliers and just improving relationship management with key stakeholders as we enter into major capital programs. Over the half year, 31 measures from our long-term plan were measured. Of course, not all measures are measured on a quarterly or half-yearly basis. Some are measured annually, but 31 measures were reported. We had 20 reaching target and 11 that did not. I guess the key area which we've noted is in regulatory, so James will talk a little bit more to these later. But just some highlights from there. We had a high level of satisfaction with our food and hygiene licensing service. Complainants satisfied with noise control services that exceeded targets, so that's quite good considering the issues we had in this area last year. But building and resource consents, processing times and customer satisfaction are both behind target. The target for this one is 100% compliance with statutory timeframes, which of course is pretty impossible. However, resource consents, we had 67% within statutory timeframes, and for building consents, 66% against statutory timeframes. So that is a little bit low, and I'm sure James will allude to that later. So for the financial summary, I'll pass over to Robert Irvine.
Thanks, David. So we heard earlier from Ross around the group results. So these numbers in front of you basically relate to the Auckland Council organisation, and it excludes the CCO. So in terms of the Auckland Council result, it's been a very good 6 months. Favourable, 20 million favourable against budget at the net direct, and that's the controllable cost level. The expenditure was 427 million versus a budget of 447 million for the period. In terms of the result, that was driven, for the favourable result, that was driven primarily by improved revenue that's coming through regulatory, so about $6 million relates to, again, the consenting volume coming through for the first 6 months, as well as there's some, I guess, additional revenue coming through other parts of the business in terms of the community business. Community services. In terms of expenditure, we're favourable by $8 million, and that's primarily driven by a lower expenditure on the salary line. So that's 11 million favourable, and that result there is across multiple areas. So there's no one particular area, but across the overall Auckland Council, there's been a lot of focus on the recruitment and just sort of really challenging the spend. Over onto capital expenditure. Again, it's a very, very solid result with a spend of about 236 million. So that's up 37 million compared to the same period from last year. The main drivers of that is coming through in the community facilities area. And then against budget, again, we're on track against budget. And as David mentioned earlier, we're 96% delivered against a budget of 247 million. Now, the key areas driving that is, again, a very strong result through the community facilities area, which are ahead by 19 million, and also healthy waters, which is up by 13 million. So, again, very good, particularly in those infrastructure in the community areas. Areas that are tracking behind is America's Cup, the DPO, and our sort of more corporate property and ICT areas. On the America's Cup, just worth noting, that's you would have heard from Barry last week, and there's no, I guess, concern with the spend. It was just timing when we put the budgets together through the LTP process, and a lot of that is still all on track. In terms of the next piece, within your packs, as highlighted last week, we have the strategic focus areas, and for Auckland Council, there are 5 of them, being water quality, natural environment, regulatory waste, and community investment. Now, these are covered in pages 60 to 67 of your pack. We've got Ian and James to come talk about the regulatory and community areas. Water, we're not touching too much on the water quality and the natural environment, because those have the separate papers that have recently been through to the Environment and Community Committee around some more detailed reporting. So we thought it would be good just to give a good update in terms of the regulatory and the community space. And with that, I'll hand over to Jay.
Well, hello again, everyone. I've been here once already. This one's a more challenging presentation to give because there's no way of gilding the lily. Our metrics are stubborn in terms of the regulatory space, especially in the building consents and resource consents areas. Without wanting to be defensive or to give excuses, we do need to remember the environment that we're working in at the moment. And part of that environment is the record high levels of consents that are coming through the system. Also, the consents that we're dealing with at the moment are of increasing complexity. Complexity equals longer time to deal with an individual consent. So I'm just getting signals to speak up more loudly. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Phil. So there's not going to be one thing that's going to move the dial in this space. We're dealing with a very complex system of issues, but there are things that we're doing. We're not just sitting on our hands and saying, the sky is falling. We can't do anything. We are working slowly but surely to try and improve our metrics in this space. So, as I said, a basket of different initiatives. We've got IT improvements which are happening, and I'll talk about the Inspect project in particular, which I get quite excited about when I see it because I think it's a very nice success story. But there are a whole range of other IT improvements that are happening. We're dealing with the balance between our internal staff and our external staff. We don't quite have that right. We're relying on consultants very heavily. And in the area of staff, we do have difficulty recruiting sufficiently qualified people into the area, or when we recruit them, it takes a long time to train them up. We do have a bunch of Canadians coming over in the near future into the building consent space who are well qualified and will very quickly be able to assist in that area. We have programs of initiatives happening as well, not just in the IT space. One that we call Meeting Demand is a whole basket of small steps, which again we hope will improve the building consent space. One of the things that I've been harping on to the general managers about is to take a better risk-based approach to processing resource and building consents. And by that, I mean really weighing up where we need to give our effort. Low risk consents, let's get them out the door as quickly as possible and focus our attention on those high risk complex projects. I'm also working with staff to increase our focus on customer service. And one of the issues we have in that area is that we don't communicate very well with our customers so that they're left hanging, not knowing what's happening to their consent. So we're working to improve that. In this area, we shouldn't overlook the positives. We have achieved or almost achieved accreditation with IANZ for the building consent space, which is great. And in fact, we are seeing now an upswing in the building consent metrics in terms of timeliness. It's early days yet, but things are improving slowly but surely. And also, we shouldn't forget that the Regulatory Services Directorate does cover liquor, dogs, and food, and all of those areas are performing very well. If we can move on to the next slide. Oh, okay, so the Inspect project was a joint project between our ICT people, our computer people, and Jeff Aronson in particular in the building consent space. And it's a tool which the inspectors have on their portable devices, which enables them very quickly and efficiently to work out what they need to focus on when they're inspecting, to record the inspections very well and very quickly, and to get that information out to our customers in a very timely fashion. There's a whole lot of metrics there. We are carrying out 160,000 inspections per year. We're inspecting 16,000 swimming pools, and this app, I guess you could call it, is helping us achieve better efficiency in that area. It was launched in February, and the purpose of this slide is just to show you that even though we launched this new software, there was barely a dip in the amounts of inspections that we're carrying out, and in fact, things have increased since then. These next two slides just give you a feel for what the inspectors see when they're out in the field, and describe some of the functionality of the software. The reports that I'm getting back is that it's very usable for our inspectors. It's really helping them churn through more inspections in a timely fashion. One of the cool things, I think, is that you can upload photos very quickly into the inspection minutes or notes, so that it's recorded very, very quickly. Other than that, that's all that I want to pass on to you guys at this point in time.
Great, thank you very much. Questions from councillors? Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yeah, financial question. So, where's our interest cost sitting at right now? What sort of interest are we paying?
So through the chair,
I know it's not regulatory, but I'm assuming we're asking any questions now, or
relating to the reports we've had. Robert, you've got a...
Yep. So I can tell you the exact numbers. So at a group level, we're on budget, and I'll give you the exact figures right here in the pack. So the finance cost for the half was 238 million, and we're on budget was 238 million. So bang on.
Okay.
Further questions? I'll throw one in on building consents, so James doesn't feel neglected. I think there's some positives that you've brought forward here, but we are still behind. In the course of your report, you said that there's an upswing in the metrics in terms of timeliness. We're sitting at 66%. I think at one stage we fell to about 50%. Where would you expect to be by the next quarterly report?
I'd expect to be up into the 80s in the next report.
Into the 80s.
Yes.
Okay. There are 18 witnesses around this table that will hold you to that. I mean, if you're making that progress, I think we would feel very pleased around this table. We know that there's real problems with it in terms of the demand, but we have to be doing better than we're doing at the moment. Thank you. Further questions? Questions from Linda Cooper?
It's not a question, but it's not.
Well, we'll move on to comments if there's not a lot of questions. Desley and then Linda.
I've got a comment, Your Worship, and it's really a big pleasure to move this report. My comments are a number of areas, but I want to start by thanking the staff who've worked incredibly hard in this department to keep us on the straight and narrow, for want of a better word. The political point I actually want to make on the financial results is to my colleagues, and that is around debt. You know, the man on the street sees our debt go up and says that we're doing a bad job because our debt's increased, and it's eye-wateringly large at 8.3 billion. What I want you clearly to understand is the debt to total assets at 16% in the slide, which is actually 15.9, so I would have said just under 16%, is not only is it below the year-end target, but it is the lowest that this council has ever had. And that is something I think should be a key message for you. Not that our debt has increased, because of course it has, but because we are doing so much, the ratio is actually the lowest that it's ever been. And I think that's a huge credit to our people behind the scenes working very hard to deliver on that. And so to that end, I was very happy to move the resolutions. Thank you.
Yep, it's certainly worth noticing that our assets have increased in the hundreds of millions and our debt in the tens of millions. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And I do want to just commend the work that James has done since he's been acting director, because he's really got to the nub of the internal things we need to deal with, but also I want to acknowledge there's so many external factors here in terms of the massive growth and continued growth in construction that is very hard to actually envisage when it takes such quite a long time to develop and embed new electronic ability for people to do the online applications, the online inspections, and as we saw Mr McCormick last week waving around the device, we've got a very clear picture of what our inspectors are doing. One thing I just want to say and commend your staff for, we have quite an issue with on-site wastewater treatment and people wanting to upgrade, which is completely in line with the work that we're doing with our water quality targeted rate. And it was brought to our attention, in fact, by 2 members of staff trying to apply for these upgrades with no change to the volume, how difficult it was. And we were able to talk to Ian Smallburn and come up with a solution prior to the plan change that is coming out at the end of the year. And I think that's an amazing, I suppose, illustration of how the department's becoming much more responsive. It's looking at innovative solutions, how we get things done, so we can actually deliver good outcomes for people and encourages people to do the right thing. So I just wanted to thank you and your whole department for the types of work that they're doing. And it is under pressure, huge pressure. And if we could attract more people and keep them, that would be fantastic. But it's a very pressurised job, and it's not the greatest place to work in Auckland when you can't afford to live here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wayne Walker.
So just an issue around the processing of consents and so on. I don't need the answer right now, but obviously if we're not performing, that's having a significant impact on the sector. And people in business, developers and the like, tell me sometimes how much it is costing them. It would be useful to have some context around that in the future. So as much and all as this is impacting on our performance, equally it's having a huge impact on the sector. And bottom line, an environment that I'd suggest is increasingly risky, and conceivably some people that literally fall over as a consequence. So if it were possible to have some information at a later point around those contexts, that would be useful.
Thank you. So the invitation is, I think, to come back to the councillor with that information. Last comment, Councillor Bartley. Oh, sorry, Councillor Filippini. Councillor Bartley, please.
Is it okay if I ask a question rather than a comment?
Yep,
I'm
sure.
still processing. I wanted to ask about regulatory, please. How come it says on track, but then if you look at the KPIs, there's quite a number of not mets. So it's not really on track.
It's a very straightforward question. James, microphone, please.
Sorry, the on-tracks that you see in the report, there are particular programs of work which are on track, which we've highlighted in this report, but our overall metrics in terms of timeliness and customer satisfaction in the building and resource consent space are not being met at this point in time.
Thank you. Councillor Filippini.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, my question, and again, I'm like Councillor Bartley, I just wanted a question. And with our debt, and it was mentioned just around comments, with our debt, if there are any decisions made post this quarter, will they, like for example, grants to organisations, will they have an effect on our debt as a result of any decisions that get made from here?
So through the chair, I guess we're heading into a budget process. So through that budget process, like every other year, we consider, I guess, all requests. We consider what comes through from the organisation, from the political run, and then we bring that forward to you in terms of the May. It will be about May. As part of that, then we are looking at those. What does it do to debt? What does it do to the overall numbers? And that's when you get presented with the overall impact of that.
Thank you very much. I'll put the motion that we receive the Auckland Council Performance Report. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no, carried. Councillors, we've got one substantive item left on the agenda, so we can probably conclude this if you're happy to carry on. We'll go slightly beyond our normal time without a break, but if everybody's happy with that, I will move on to item number 14, which is the July conference of the Local Government New Zealand for 2019. If I can invite Warwick and Marguerite to the table. I think Warwick's here somewhere.
No,
you're on your notes, Marguerite. Before I invite you to speak to the paper, I'll move the recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Darby and Marguerite, if I can ask you to speak to the paper and the issues we need to determine today.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is a paper about the annual LGNZ conference. The decisions that you need to make are who the delegates for all Auckland Council are going to be to vote at the annual general meeting. There are 4 delegates in total, and also decide who will attend the conference.
So, it's, I was expecting a slightly wider explanation. Right, so we have questions. Councillor Fesso-Collins.
Thanks, Mayor. I just had one question, and it's, you know, the actual conference program, are they streaming any bits of it? Because I don't have an intention to go, but there's a couple of sessions I'm interested in. I think if they were streaming it or something. There was the one with Justin Lester and Adrian Orr, I think, something like that. But that's all. I just wondered if parts of it were going to be streamed.
Good question. Do we have an answer to that, Marguerite? Phil.
I think we would need to check, but certainly the sessions have been recorded in the last couple of years. So whether it's live streamed or available afterwards, not sure. We will check.
We'll check out and get back to you. That's a good point, Councillor. Any further questions? Councillor Darby.
It says the Mayor and another 3. That's 4, isn't it?
Four delegates, but maybe 6 people able to attend the conference. 5, I think we've got.
5. Oh, okay. So we need
Marguerite, would you like to clarify that?
Yes, so the attendees for the annual general meetings, we need 4 delegates. And the attendance to the conference, we can have as many attendees as we want, but our advice in the past, and it is again our advice this year, is that it be a total of 5 councillors, and that's to manage budgets and in total attendance of Auckland Council representatives, because we will also have local board representatives.
So just to give an idea, I mean, there's nothing set out in stone that there has to be 5 attendees, but the cost of travel, the cost of accommodation, the cost of registration by itself is $1,400, travel about maybe $400, and accommodation $400, and that's booking ahead for travel and having reasonably budget accommodation. We're just sensitive, obviously, to the cost that we impose. Of the 4 delegates, one generally in recent years we've had the practice of appointing somebody from the local board. Last year it was Pippa Coombe. So we'd be having 3 governing body members plus 2 other who are delegates plus 2 other governing body members who might wish to attend is what we're planning for, but there's a little flexibility around that if councillors desired. Councillor Filipaina.
Worship, at what stage would you want the nominations? Because I know that Councillor Casey is interested, so I'll be now.
Now is the short answer.
Now? Oh, well, I nominate Councillor Casey.
Well, just before we get into that, you're welcome to do that in just a minute. Councillor Darby, you've got another question? Yep. Okay, thank you. You're foreshadowing nominations. Councillor Simpson, question? Okay. Well, I can help with the people who have indicated a desire to go. I don't have an overwhelming desire to go, but I feel that it's appropriate for me to represent the council there. But I've had expressions of interest from councillors Hulse, Casey, local board member Pipacoombe, councillors Hills and Cashmore. Those are the names that I've received to date, but it's not too late if people wanted to put their name forward. Can I just mention one other factor that is pertinent to it. The Local Government New Zealand conference runs at the same time as a meeting of the National Council, the Metro Sector, Zone 1, Te Maruata. So maybe Councillor Filipaina, I'm not sure whether you're indicated an intention to attend. It cuts cost if people going to those conferences are also the delegates, but that's not an iron-bound rule. Okay, further questions first. Councillor Collins.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I was just going to query if Councillor Filipaina is going to go for there's usually the Māori group that meet, and I think that's important that meet as well.
Yeah.
So, Your Worship, I know we've reached the limit without my name being there, which is okay, which is good, because I'll then make inquiries with Local Government New Zealand to see if they can pick up the tab for me as the rep for Te Maruata. It's unusual for this to happen because I've been the rep for Te Maruata since 2011. So I'll make that request because I think it's important. So I'll get that done and I'll have a chat to, we can have
but perhaps we could expand the delegation and you'll make independent inquiries as to whether you can get assistance towards it. If you're interested in going, I think we should put you up front there. Councillor Cooper.
Support of that. I mean, when you look at the Pacifica population and the Māori population in Auckland, it's the largest. I think we have to have Councillor Filipaina there. He has a particular world view that a lot of the other people at the local government conference will certainly not have. And with his experience, I'd absolutely support if we have to pay for him. I think it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Councillor.
As long as he doesn't want first class.
I don't think they have first class in Air New Zealand now. Councillor Collins, sorry, did I cut you? Oh, okay, my apologies for cutting you off. Marguerite, you wanted to comment.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just if Councillor Filipaina wants to go down to Wellington to attend the meeting, regardless of whether he will attend the conference or be a delegate, we would cover his airline costs as per normal.
So we've got 3 speakers for and none against so far, Councillor Filipaina. Councillor Hulse. Okay. Are there any other councillors? Sorry, Councillor Wayne Walker.
At this point, I'd be interested in going, and that's primarily because the items under discussion, localism, and also climate change are issues that I've been taking a strong interest in my attendance at the Zone 1 meetings. if there's an issue around cost, I can cover my accommodation and flights and the like, if that's an issue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I have a total of 8 nominees. I'm just looking if there's any further comment from anyone or question. If not,
you don't have to worry about public whom she will be supported by her board.
Okay, so just been advised that well, Pipakum, I think, is a nominee to be a delegate. She will be supported by her board. So actually that reduces it down to 7 members of the governing body. So I, maybe the easy way to, if I move and if there's dissent, by all means speak up, that I move that the delegates, that is the people that attend the AGM, be the Mayor, Councillors Hulse, Deputy Mayor Cashmore, and let's make sure I've got the right numbers there. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So if I got the right number of delegates, because Pipakum will also be a delegate. Yeah, that's so. I move that the 3 governing body delegates be the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor, and Councillor Hulse. Oh. Yep. Yeah. But oh, I see. Okay.
Don't get confused between delegates to the conference and
okay. Just getting advice from feedback that we've had that the delegates. So we've got a list of 7. The delegates be the Mayor, Councillors Hulse and Councillor Casey, and the attendees be those 3 members plus Councillor Hills, Deputy Mayor Cashmore, Councillor Filipina, Councillor Walker. That seems to satisfy all needs. Marguerite.
Just in your recommendation to appoint the 3 delegates, the way it needs to be written is that you appoint Councillor Hulse, Councillor Casey, and a local board member.
And a local board member, because they will make that determination.
That's right.
Okay, that sounds fine. So if there's no dissent, I'll propose that, and that will be built into the recommendations that we have in front of us. We're keeping up with that. If there's no further questions or comments, I will move the recommendations as a block. All those in favour?
Sorry, Your Worship. Look, I've only got. So you're not up there as the delegate. That's all I'm saying.
Yes. I am. I'm in a separate. There's a separate recommendation. Appoint that, which is appoint the mayor as the presiding delegate. I could have slipped out that way, but I'm sure you would have picked me up on it. Okay, so I'll put those recommendations. Sorry, Marguerite.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, we just need a little bit of time to put the names up on the recommendations before you put it to the vote.
We will pause.
So it needs to remove. D needs to read approve attendance at the LGNZ conference of the mayor and the governing body delegates appointed in recommendation B, and then the name of the other councillors.
Okay, and that will be a total of 7 councillors. We're still, for the sake of certainty, we'll just pause. In the meantime, I understand that our representative from Stuff here today, Ripu, it's your birthday, so we'll move a round of happy birthday and welcome to you here today.
To you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday
dear Ripu. I think that's a first, actually. I don't think I've heard councillors sing to a member of the press before. But best wishes for the day. Okay. Okay, we're still a work in progress here. We do need to get it right, so the recommendations are in front of you. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. We come to the last item on the agenda, which is the summary of governing body information, memos and briefing. I'll move the motion accordingly, seconded by Councillor Collins. There are no discussion. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. And thank you, councillors, for a very good meeting. And I think lunch is probably ready to be served.